Probably why Bagnaia signed for another 2 years then.
Well,
he's getting ahead of the curve.
A perfect segue, I think, to talking about that signing, which literally just broke before we hit the record button, really. Bagnaia has confirmed that he will go with Ducati all the way through till 2024. And Keith, you spoke about it right at the top of the show, but this is a big deal because, you know, to get this on the dotted line shows obviously their commitment to each other, but also it means that that's one seat less for all the other riders to start thinking about, because I think Pete spoke about it so much last year. This is the time where actually riders thinking about, okay, what am I going to be doing next year already?
It's where Ducati are ahead of the game, and it's where Yamaha are not, or haven't been in recent times. It's getting those signatures signed up, sorted, that pathway, that clear pathway sorted. Ducati are right on that. I mean, it's not just their bike development, it's their personnel development as well. I mean, it's a brilliant signing. And I'm sure Bagnaia, as Ducati, would be absolutely happy to have that signature for those 2 years. He is hot property. And I can't imagine the financial incentive there must be there as well to get him signed up for 23-24. Brilliant. A really good signing. Great team, going from strength to strength. Could you see any other winning the world title this year? Motorbike racing is a funny thing, isn't it? Ducati have still got that pleasure to come. It's not happened to them for a long time.
I learned the hard way last year. Predict if you dare.
It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Bagnaia and Ducati. I mean, after the end of season that they had last year, and we're perhaps also seeing that Ducati, they've tried getting the big names like Lorenzo. We've seen them do that, and it took even until the second season for even someone as talented as Lorenzo to get on terms with that bike. They've now got, as Keith says, they've got these riders, young riders coming up. They're already winners on that bike. So that whole process of adapting to the Ducati, understanding its strengths, they're doing that whilst they're learning MotoGP, and they're ready, aren't they? That you can just plug them into the factory team almost. They've now got the security of having Bagnaia, proven guy who can win, as we saw, 4 races, fight for the World Championship. He's now done and dusted. You know, how long will they wait for the second seat? I mean, Bastianini has made no secret of the fact he wants to be a factory Ducati rider. Jorge Martin also. There was actually a little bit of niggle in some of the debriefs where, you know, Martin seemed to think Bastianini's already talking about wanting to be in the factory team. I don't understand why he's, you know, so you could see they're already thinking about this. You also had, I can't remember which rider said, but Alex Marquez actually said, right from testing, riders are trying to impress. He said, you know, people are pushing as hard in testing, partly because they want to put themselves in the window for the contracts, because they know now is the time, you know, to get yourself noticed. So, yeah, it's he's the 4th person to sign, we should say, for 2023. So Marc Marquez is already confirmed, Brad Binder and Morbidelli. So he's the 4th guy.
Imagine how the managers are running around between the sheds. It's about time they did some work for their cash. They're having quite a hard job, management, trying to get it all nailed down now, personal managers and the like. It was always one of my favourite spotting places, sat on the deck of IRTA, the International Race Teams Association, the big silver trucks in the middle of the paddock. They are the authority, if you like, of everything that matters. And you just watch scurrying about between the barriers and under the steps and the stairs, managers talking with each other and manoeuvring themselves into the position where their chess pieces were going to go onto the table. That job, I think, has got a little harder over the years. Maybe not in Bagnaia's case because he's such hot property, but tricky one.
Well, it was a huge bit of breaking news to come through this morning on Monday as we record it. I just want to move on to talking about KTM, if I may, and Tech 3 to be precise, and the 2 rookies, of course, this year, Remy Gardner, Raul Fernandez. It's not been, when you talk about trying to impress, I suppose, not that they haven't impressed, but it's not been the smoothest of starts for either of those riders. Obviously, we've got Gardner dealing with his wrists, but particularly Raul Fernandez sort of calling his testing off early after, well, a huge accident in turn 12 on the Saturday of testing. He then fell again after a few laps the day after. And I suppose the question comes back to a topic that, you know, we've spoken about far too many times. Should he have been prevented from riding on the final day? Was he properly tested? Why was he allowed to come back out after such a huge shunt when clearly he wasn't fit and healthy enough to do that?
You know, this is one of my pet hates, and it will be one of those pet hates where, you know, if any of the hierarchy at IRTA or Dorna listen to our podcast, which I think some do, they're going to hate me for this as well. I've banged this drum now since I came back into the paddock in 2014. I remember asking somebody quite high up in the mechanism, if you like, and it was after that, was it Aragon? Petrucci, I think he banged his head there, and we spoke to him later in the day, and he didn't know what day of the week it was. And I remember going to one of the top men and saying, how is that possible in today's, modern thinking? And he said, well, he seemed okay. And I remember being absolutely shocked by the response that I got from high ups in the organisation. And I think that we still are not much beyond that. I think they're a little bit more aware now, but you can't have these things happen and put people with effectively a head injury back out on a motorbike. You can't leave it to the rider. You can't leave it to the team even, because the team will probably, if the rider insists, will allow him to go back out. Maybe that they shouldn't, but it shouldn't be left up to the team or up to the rider to make that decision. There should be a mechanism in place. Now, whether that has to be technology involved, and it's out there, the technology is readily available, easy to come by. It's in other sports. I think NASCAR have had it for a while. The rate of deceleration or the algorithm that it takes. I mean, I'm sure Alpine Stars could tell you exactly the kind of rate of the crash, because the algorithms it takes to pop an airbag in your leather suit is all set up. The technology is there. Everything is there. It's not like it would be a difficult thing to do, but it's simple to me. If your body has gone through a certain set of parameters, you're out. It's as simple as that. You are now removed from that weekend until further tests are done and you've proved you are compos mentis completely. It can't be any other way. Secondary injury is something that, concussion is something that we've been discussing for some time. You don't have to be knocked out. I used to think that you only got concussion when you got knocked out. The amount of times I've got knocked out, clearly, from the way I speak, I've got a head injury. It's one of them ones where I'm not sure how my health will be later in my life with the amount of bangs I've had on the head. My memory is not brilliant. Is that age, or is that something to do with my injuries before? These elements need taken out of it. You don't need that doubt. You need to be proactive in these things. I mean, head injury, concussion, deceleration, whatever it is a major thing that we're not taking seriously enough in the premier class of motorcycle sport. And I don't understand why. There's plenty of money. Dorna are brilliant at just about everything they do. Look at the way they've managed the COVID thing over the last couple of years. I mean, it's just been outstanding the way they've managed governments, authorities that they've been racing on, teams that they've made do things that teams wouldn't normally do, comply with, these particularly strict rules. Dorna have the capacity to be able to achieve this. Carlos Ezpeleta, young man, son of top man, he's a very, very sharp kid. I would have expected Carlos Ezpeleta to have taken a lead in this, to be frank with you, to name a name, one of the top names, because he is a modern era, smart young man that would easily have the power and the wherewithal to be able to put this in place. And I don't understand why it's not being put in place. There are some journalists that Simon Patterson, I'll mention Simon Patterson, not a man that I've always agreed with, and he's never agreed with me either. It's just a relationship we've had over a long period of time. But I respect him hugely when he sticks his head above the turret and says what he says about this head injury situation. He pushes it every time. And I think that it needs pushing. It needs saying out loud, we need to do something in MotoGP where head injuries and the likelihood of that are taken much, much more seriously, and we are much more proactive in how we deal with it.
Well, what's curious about this as well, Pete, is that, over the winter, there have been updates to the medical form that you have to follow following an incident like this, but with new requirements. But it just seems that obviously they haven't been followed through properly.
That's exactly what I was going to say, Harry. Yeah, that's why it's so surprising, isn't it, that we've recently had this announcement that there's going to be stricter checks, unspecified exactly what they'll be, but that they will ask for more evidence about, whether a rider is fit to return, etc., etc. But I mean, you could see
why are they unspecified though, Pete? I mean, how can they be unspecified when we know exactly the situation here from not just our sport but other sports? You can take the lead from other sports that have already got these protocols in place. And the tools for measuring head injury, or rather what would cause head injury. I mean, I think that all of us, are susceptible to a head injury. See, excuse me. The susceptibility to deceleration or whatever it might be, a bang on the head, different people react in different ways. But there needs to be a parameter where that is taken away. When you've reached that particular thump on the bonds, you're out of there for a period of time.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, that makes perfect sense to me, Keith. I mean, and just to give a silly little example of how you can have, let's say, some sort of head issue without being knocked out. I fell off a motocross bike once and gave myself a bit of a whack on the head, not knocked out. But felt pretty sick, went to casualty, everything fine, went home. About 5-6 hours later, I'm sat on a sofa watching TV, nobody else in the room, and it suddenly felt like the sofa was flipping over backwards. It just felt like someone was pulling the back of the chair, and I grabbed my hands on the side, and it made me realize, wow, yeah, it has had some sort of effect, So it's a strange thing, isn't it? You don't know how people are going to react, in what cases, what timeline, or whatever. And as we saw, it was bad enough for Fernandez to have another accident. So clearly, yeah, something needs to be done to put a stop to this. But
I've had exactly that same scenario on the sofa. Came back from motocrossing, exactly the same, testing and practicing and messing around with the lads. There's 2 examples. I wonder how many examples there are. If you've got everybody together in bike racing, how many examples of that we could come up with? There would be hundreds, if not thousands of them, because we are susceptible as motorcycle racers to a bang on the head. I just think that I'm surprised that we're in 2022 and we're still not quite there when it comes to the protocol that needs to. Nobody wants to take a rider out of a race. It's almost like this COVID thing, isn't it? We're going to end up with, you've flown in from wherever it is, you've done your test on your first day at the track, and lo and behold, you've got COVID. So you're taken out of the race.
That's the ironic thing, though, isn't it, Keith? That you could have no symptoms and be forced to miss the race because you fail a test, even though you are, by all intents and purposes, it seems physically fine. And yet you can have some kind of physical and mental symptoms after a heavy accident, and yet you're able to continue. That's the ironic thing at the moment.
That's something that doesn't add up, does it? Well, talking of injuries, of course, Marc Marquez back out on the bike after his bit of a tumultuous winter, but looks like after 2 falls, that hasn't seemed to have triggered anything with his eye injury that he sustained over the winter. But this is sort of my way to coming on to a couple of listener questions, because we had a lot of Marc Marquez fans talking about how you both think he will get on this year, especially after this ropey start, and how well you think the Honda is slightly redesigned. We've seen from the images out on track, but they're not calling it a revolution.
Well, I think that you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, he's come back, the bike's slightly different, and we've already talked about how tricky the 2 tracks are that they've got to test and get data from. The fact he's fell down is because he's pushing the boundaries as he has to, as he should. Brilliant that it appears that his eye injury particularly, is not played up, but that is going to be a worry forever now. That's there. That susceptibility, he might go the entire year, be the full-on Marc Marquez, or he might not, depending on what happens during the course of the year. So that is going to be a worry for the rest of his career, I believe. Regarding the Honda, yeah, it's unusual. He's got to get used to what it's like, and it's not the same motorbike that he left when he finished off, taking the sabbatical, if you like, through injury. Pol Espargaro seems to be getting on with it all right, which I would have expected him to have got on all right with the last one, to be honest, previously, but he didn't seem to quite as well as this one. Developments have moved on. Honda has moved on. But again, I've got to draw a line under the fact that we are testing at 2 tracks that aren't representative of what we're going to get from now on in. I just think that Sepang at 90% humidity on a 2-day test, and then Mandalika with the track falling apart and not quite where it needs to be with a 1 meter wide racing line, is indicative of where we're headed. So Marquez pushed to the limit, otherwise he wouldn't have been falling down. But I think he's going to be a contender this year. I've got a real feeling that Marquez will be back on it again, and I just think he's a matured version of the Marc Marquez of before, and he's still going to be a massive weapon.
I think that new Honda looks fast. I think the impressive thing about it is it's not just one rider that's been fast on it. As you say, Keith, bearing in mind there's a lot we don't know, but still, all of the Honda riders seem to be saying the same kind of things and seem to be going quick on this bike. They like the rear grip, the extra rear grip. Pole keeps using this word safer. It's safer. You can get the speed without that risk that they were taking before going into the corners. And I don't know. I think it looks good. I mean, when you looked at the race simulations, the LCR guys were actually the best on the last day in Indonesia, in that heat. So, I mean, that Marc is going to raise, when it comes to a race, he's going to pull something out the bag, isn't he? And if that bike it's got a strong engine, we should say that as well. It's not too far off the new Ducati, it seems. I mean, that's one thing we can take from testing is the straight line speed. And it's close to the Ducati. And I think if that bike is a bit safer, it looks like it's close enough to the Ducati. You've got to imagine that Marc will pull out the magic. I think the bigger question mark is, can Pole carry this momentum into the season? Bear in mind, this new Honda, it hasn't just done these 2 tests. They've been testing it since Misano last year. They really put this big effort in. So this bike, it's been used at Misano, Jerez, Sepang, Mandalika. So they've got more of a range of data on this bike. And it does seem like, they've been quite cautious what they're saying, but I think that all of the riders believe it's certainly a step better, but nobody knows exactly how much until a race happens today.
Well, also being asked from our excellent listeners on the subject of Yamaha and how we've already said, they don't look to quite have perhaps the outright pace and clear of the field that we might have expected. Maybe Speed and Conviction has asked, does Yamaha